Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis très heureux d'être avec vous pour cette conférence et merci pour l'invitation. Toutes mes excuses pour mon absence qui est due à des petits problèmes de santé, mais je suis très heureux d'être avec vous via cet enregistrement et pour l'échange de tout à l'heure. Alors je commence tout de suite. Moi, je voudrais vous présenter un peu la manière dont l'historien peut utiliser les photographies dans son travail, ce qui est une question finalement assez classique. Mais je voudrais aussi peut-être aller un peu plus loin en interrogeant la manière dont les personnes concernées par une histoire, par une expérience, peuvent elles-mêmes mobiliser les photographies, notamment dans leur construction personnelle, dans leur construction subjective. Alors cette recherche a été financée par un programme de l'Agence nationale de la recherche ici à l'université d'Angers et au sein du laboratoire TEMOS. Alors, il faut que je vous parle un peu justement de l'objet de ma recherche. Alors, il s'agit de 5000 enfants eurasiens, métis, de pères français, de mères vietnamiennes, laotiennes, cambodgiennes, parfois chinoises, qui ont été envoyés en France entre les années 1940 et les années 1970. On a utilisé le terme de rapatriement, qui est un terme impropre, évidemment, puisque ces enfants étaient bien sûr nés en Indochine et n'avaient jamais connu la France auparavant. Un certain nombre d'ouvrages de collègues français et étrangers ont déjà évoqué cette question, et au milieu, ici, vous avez l'ouvrage que j'ai donc fait paraître en 2024, il y a quelques mois, après une dizaine d'années de recherche et de travail. Un travail d'historien, c'est-à-dire à partir d'archives, beaucoup, à partir d'entretiens oraux. Les personnes concernées ont aujourd'hui entre 65 et 85 ans. Et puis aussi donc ce travail sur les photographies dont je vais vous parler un peu plus tout à l'heure. Mais auparavant, quelques éléments de compréhension du contexte et de l'objet. Dès la fin du 19e siècle, lors de la colonisation de l'Indochine, s'est posé très vite ce qu'on peut appeler un fait eurasien, une question métisse, avec la naissance d'enfants de pères essentiellement français et de mères vietnamiennes. Cette apparition de la question métisse, elle a été très tôt très photographiée. Et on a un corpus photographique tout à fait important sur ces Eurasiens, même s'ils étaient finalement très peu nombreux. La question, c'est quelle place pour ces Eurasiens dans le système colonial en Indochine? Est-ce que ces métis, et notamment ces enfants métis, doivent faire partie des dominants, par leur père, si j'ose dire, ou est-ce qu'ils doivent faire partie des dominés par leur mère? Parce que cette question métisse, elle vient bousculer en fait ce système colonial qui est très binaire. Alors ça a provoqué la mobilisation de beaucoup de réformateurs sociaux et donc beaucoup de projets de prise en charge de ces enfants, quelle doit être leur place dans cette société, etc. Et puis il y a deux décrets qui sont importants, deux mesures. Un en 1928 qui dit, je résume, que pour un enfant né de père inconnu, mais présumé français, eh bien, cet enfant-là peut devenir français. Ce qui est important parce que s'il devient français, s'il est de nationalité française, il peut être pris en charge par les services de la France. Et puis un décret de 1943, encore plus clair, qui crée les enfants, les pupilles, eurasiens d'Indochine. Pupilles eurasiens d'Indochine. Ça veut dire qu'on crée un statut spécial pour ces enfants qui, avec la nationalité française, peuvent être pris en charge par les services de la France. Même si, évidemment, à l'époque, ils sont encore très peu nombreux. Mais la guerre d'Indochine, 1946-1954, va évidemment tout changer. C'est 500 000 soldats français qui arrivent d'un coup en quelques années, sur ce territoire. Beaucoup de ces soldats sont des soldats d'Afrique, et donc beaucoup de naissances, des dizaines de milliers d'enfants métis vont naître, eurasiens ou africasiens, donc de pères africains, de mères vietnamiennes. Et les 3 photos que je vous ai mis là sont des photos un peu, trompeuses finalement vis-à-vis de la réalité parce que ces tableaux idylliques là que vous voyez vont se rencontrer finalement, très peu souvent. Le père, la mère, les enfants et cetera. En fait, les pères vont être les grands absents de cette, histoire. Ils sont morts à la guerre, ils sont prisonniers, ils sont partis, ils se désintéressent souvent complètement de leur progéniture qu'ils ont eue au Vietnam. Parfois, ils sont mariés et en France, ils ont déjà des enfants. Et puis, les femmes, eh bien, sont souvent, sous la pression sociale, familiale, d'avoir eu des enfants avec des Français et leur situation est pas facile. Elles sont souvent, dégradées, elles sont souvent, contraintes de suivre l'armée française et ces mères, eh bien, ont beaucoup de mal finalement à s'occuper, de leurs enfants, qui sont mal acceptés par la société, indo-chinoise. Et donc ces enfants, on peut dire qu'ils sont un peu désaffiliés. Ça veut dire que, ils n'ont plus de père, leurs mères ont beaucoup de difficultés, même si elles sont souvent, aimantes, c'est pas ça la question, mais elles ont beaucoup de difficultés à, s'en sortir. Et donc ces enfants deviennent un peu des enjeux de la guerre et des enjeux aussi de ce qu'on peut appeler des biopolitiques. Et c'est dans ce cadre-là que une association, la Fédération des œuvres de l'enfance française d'Indochine, eh bien, va se donner comme objectif de prendre en charge ces enfants-là. Donc les mères confient en quelque sorte leurs enfants à la FOFI, et la FOFI va estimer que, eh bien, dans beaucoup de cas, la meilleure solution, c'est d'envoyer ces enfants en France. Vous avez compris, sans leur père, sans leur mère. Donc d'envoyer ces enfants-là seuls en France. Dans quel but? Bah, d'abord parce que le projet de la FOFI, c'est un projet colonial. Pendant la guerre, il s'agit d'envoyer des enfants en France, qu'ils se forment et qu'ils reviennent comme des cadres de l'Indochine coloniale. Évidemment, après la guerre, après Dien Bien Phu, les accords de Genève, l'indépendance du Vietnam, du Laos et du Cambodge, il n'est plus question de ça. Le projet devient post-colonial, c'est-à-dire envoyer des enfants en France pour les sauver, notamment du risque de communistes, etc., et aussi pour les intégrer dans la population française. En faisant, comme disait William Bazet, qui est le chef de cette FOFI, lui-même eurasien, pour qu'ils deviennent des liens, des traits d'union entre leur pays de naissance, le Vietnam, et leur patrie, c'est-à-dire la France. Et cette FOFI va être assez puissante. Vous le voyez sur ces 2 cartes qui ont été composées par un ancien pupille justement de la FOFI. La FOFI est très puissante, que ce soit en Indochine, où elle contrôle de très nombreuses structures, ou en France, où elle gère un certain nombre de centres, de foyers qui accueillent ces enfants arrivant d'Indochine. Et là, sur ce petit schéma, vous avez juste une idée du phénomène et de sa graduation dans le temps. Vous voyez qu'avant 54, c'est la ligne rouge. La FOFI travaille plutôt évidemment en Indochine. Et puis après 54, eh bien, c'est en France, évidemment, qu'elle travaille et qu'elle accueille ces enfants-là. Alors la FOFI va produire beaucoup de photographies de ces déplacements d'enfants, de ces centres d'accueil, que ce soit en Indochine et surtout en France. Alors il s'agit en fait pour la FOFI de prouver, de démontrer que ces enfants sont bien pris en charge, qu'ils sont pris en charge dans la discipline, qu'ils sont pris en charge dans des locaux qui sont adaptés. Vous voyez là des photos de l'abbaye de Saint-Rambert-en-Bugey, on est du côté de Lyon. Photos extérieures, intérieures, dortoirs, la propreté des sanitaires, des petites filles qui font leur communion, l'école, la formation professionnelle. Toutes les photographies produites par la FOFI sont en quelque sorte autant de preuves que la FOFI fait bien son travail. Donc là, on a tout un corpus de très nombreux albums photographies qui montrent cette situation. Si on décode un petit peu, on se rend compte que dans ces photographies, on voit une prise en charge des enfants qui est très genrée. il y avait des établissements pour filles, des établissements pour garçons, ce qui est normal pour l'époque. Mais la manière dont les photos montrent les centres des filles, les foyers des garçons est très très différente. Alors je ne vais pas développer beaucoup parce que j'ai pas vraiment le temps, mais les quelques clichés que je vous ai présentés ici sont très suggestifs. Euh, Quand les garçons sont valorisés individuellement dans certaines tâches, etc., c'est la photo en haut à gauche, ou que leurs corps sont mis en avant, c'est la photo en bas à droite. On a pour les filles très peu de photos individuelles, toujours des photos de groupe, posées, très formelles. Vous voyez la photo en haut à droite, c'est une photo de vacances par exemple, hein. Et puis la photo en bas à droite, eh bien, j'allais dire une photo très classique de ce qu'on attend en quelque sorte d'activité pour les jeunes filles. Ici, c'est de la danse. Donc, la gestion, la représentation des corps, la représentation des individualités est vraiment très différente dans ce corpus de photos de la FOFI. Ce qui m'a aussi poussé, et c'est mon deuxième point, à m'intéresser à cette question plutôt de la prise en charge des filles. Et j'ai donc essayé dans une exposition sur Muséa. Alors Muséa, c'est le musée virtuel d'histoire des femmes et du genre qui existe à l'université d'Angers depuis maintenant 2004, depuis plus de 20 ans. Et j'ai essayé dans une exposition intitulée Comme les rayons différés d'une étoile, alors c'est entre guillemets, c'est une expression de Roland Barthes qui, vous le savez, a beaucoup travaillé sur la photographie, et pour interroger un peu les photos de ces Eurasiennes rapatriées, toujours avec des guillemets, en France. Et grâce à quelques moyens, l'exposition est aussi accessible en anglais et en vietnamien. Alors pourquoi une exhibition, une exposition pardon, sur les filles et les femmes? Parce qu'elles ont beaucoup moins parlé de cette expérience du déplacement que les garçons. Les anciens pupilles de la FOFI ont une association, et dans cette association, eh bien, un certain nombre d'entre eux, d'entre elles, se livrent leurs souvenirs. C'est beaucoup, beaucoup plus des garçons que des filles, par exemple. Les types de photographies que j'ai utilisées, vous en voyez un florilège ici, des photos de groupe, que ce soit en Indochine ou en France, c'est le cas en haut à droite, là, une photo prise en Indochine. Des photos, des portraits individuels ou mère-fille ou de famille, vous en avez déjà vu un certain nombre, il y en a un ici au milieu de la diapositive, qui sont souvent des clichés de professionnels, hein. Les professionnels étaient très nombreux au Vietnam, au Cambodge et au Laos à cette époque. Des photos de type administratif, comme cette petite photo là à gauche, qui figure sur un laissez-passer et qui peut finalement nous en dire beaucoup aussi. Et puis ce cadre blanc, parce que je me suis aussi interrogé sur la manière dont les personnes concernées ont pu souffrir du manque de photographie dans leur déplacement. J'y reviendrai tout à l'heure. Et puis, quelle est la contribution de ces photos j'allais dire, à l'histoire, à la construction historique? Je vais essayer de vous montrer qu'elles sont essentielles. J'ai parlé d'entretiens oraux tout à l'heure. Au cours de ces entretiens oraux, voilà une campagne là, que j'ai menée en 2018, il y en a eu beaucoup d'autres, hein, qui vous montre un petit peu les personnes que j'ai pu rencontrer, et j'attire votre attention sur la dernière colonne. C'est-à-dire que ces entretiens oraux, ces témoignages, très forts évidemment, émotionnellement aussi, hein, pour les personnes concernées, eh bien, ça a été l'occasion d'accéder à des corpus de photographie personnels qui parfois sont très riches, très très riches, hein. Vous voyez, j'ai mis parfois nothing, very interesting, et exceptionnel. Et exceptionnel, ça veut dire que parfois vraiment, on a des corpus de photos qui apportent véritablement beaucoup à la narration qui peut être fait par la personne concernée. Et puis, quelques grandes questions que je me suis posées, c'est évidemment la question de la construction subjective de ces enfants, de ces filles qui arrivent toutes petites pour beaucoup d'entre elles, et comment elles grandissent, comment elles deviennent des adolescentes, des adultes, des jeunes femmes, des jeunes mères, des retraités aujourd'hui aussi. En gros, comment on passe, vous voyez, de la photo du haut à la photo du bas, hein. C'est-à-dire, de ces jeunes filles-là de ces petites filles qui sont en train de faire un petit spectacle, jusqu'à, ces femmes d'un certain âge qui reviennent, dans les lieux où elles ont grandi et qui, vous voyez, se réhabillent, avec, des, tenues traditionnelles vietnamiennes et cetera. Bon, les questions de la mémoire, je évite, hein, de l'identité, des racines, de la culture, de la transmission, notamment de la transmission interfamiliale, intrafamiliale, la sororité, et puis la réappropriation aussi de toute cette histoire. Donc autant de questions qui ont guidé mes réflexions. Alors, quel type de photographie utiliser? Eh bien, beaucoup de photographies sont des photographies de la vie d'avant. C'est-à-dire de la vie que ces enfants pardon, ont eu avant de partir. Des photos de famille, des photos qui respirent une certaine aisance, des photos de professionnels, hein, posées dans des studios, etc. Qui parlent un peu de la paix, un peu de la guerre, de la rupture, de la séparation. En fait, beaucoup de photos qui fixent quelle était la vie d'avant et le bonheur un peu familial qui a été perdu. D'autres photos fixent précisément le moment de la séparation, le moment du départ. Ici, vous avez une photo d'Hélène et de sa maman en 1963, vous voyez, prise dans un studio. Puis vous avez deux autres photographies qui montrent exactement le moment où Hélène va monter dans un avion pour partir vers la France. Et quand on regarde ces deux clichés, c'est tout à fait intéressant parce que sur le premier cliché, on voit la petite Hélène habillée très légèrement avec des sandalettes. Pourquoi des sandalettes? Parce que sa maman lui a simplement dit qu'elles allaient faire un pique-nique. Et pour aller faire un pique-nique, on s'habille légèrement. Mais arrivé à l'aéroport, eh bien, évidemment, arrive le moment du départ. Et vous voyez sur la deuxième photographie, à droite, que Hélène n'a plus des sandalettes, mais elle a des chaussures fermées, parce que il s'agit de partir et de prendre l'avion. Et quand Hélène me parle de ces photographies-là, eh bien, elle se souvient de ses sandalettes, elle se souvient de ses chaussures fermées, à partir de ces photos qui finalement ont fixé pour toujours le moment de ce départ. Il y a des choses exceptionnelles, comme cet improbable album photo de Camille. Camille est née en 1948, elle part en France en 1954, elle considère que sa mère l'a abandonnée. Elle revient 50 ans plus tard, au Vietnam, elle rencontre un vieux cousin qui lui confie cet album photo que sa mère a gardé toute sa vie, très précieusement. Et pour Camille, évidemment, c'est beaucoup d'émotions que de retrouver très longtemps après cet album. J'en ai tiré une petite capsule vidéo que vous pourrez voir sur ce lien, où, alors ça c'est un montage que Camille m'a envoyé elle-même, hein. C'est elle qui a fait ce montage. Vous voyez en haut à droite une petite photo, en bas c'est la même photo, mais avec, alors, un autre exemplaire de la même photo, avec un petit commentaire écrit en vietnamien, et puis à côté, un petit billet de traduction. En fait, la première photo en haut, c'est celle avec laquelle Camille est arrivée en France. La deuxième photo en bas, c'est celle qui était dans l'album de Camille, avec quelques mots écrits par sa mère. Et quand Camille récupère cette petite photo 50 ans après, elle ne sait plus lire le vietnamien. Elle demande à son vieux cousin de le traduire, et c'est ce que vous avez à gauche. Et cette simple photographie, ce simple montage de Camille montre comment finalement elle s'approprie son histoire. Alors d'autres m'ont envoyé des montages photos construits. Ça veut dire que là, j'ai pas le temps de vous expliquer ces deux montages, mais ça veut dire que dans chacun des deux cas, là, la personne concernée a voulu me faire passer une histoire en se disant, voilà, cet historien qui s'intéresse à nous, eh bien, je peux aussi lui dire des choses, lui faire passer des choses grâce à ses photographies. Et puis, il y a des personnes concernées qui utilisent la photographie pour se raconter. C'est le cas de Paul, en bas à gauche. Vous voyez ce panneau photo qu'elle a réalisé, et quand les anciennes se rencontrent, elle l'affiche. Elle est au milieu, là, c'est la petite fille. Et puis autour, il y a des photographies. Là aussi, je n'ai pas le temps de vous expliquer très précisément tout, mais ce sont des choix très judicieux qui montrent en fait un petit peu toute son enfance. Et Marie-Dominique, c'est en haut, c'est sur la droite. Marie-Dominique, eh bien, elle cherche des ressemblances dans son ascendance et sa descendance. Marie-Dominique, elle est en bas à gauche. Au-dessus, c'est sa mère. À droite, c'est sa fille, puis sa petite-fille. Et vous voyez, c'est elle-même qui réalise ces montages photos pour retrouver en quelque sorte un sens, une narrativité généalogique, si j'ose dire, entre ces 4 générations. Pour terminer, vous pourrez retrouver aussi un certain nombre de ces éléments-là dans un article que j'ai fait aussi pour une encyclopédie en ligne sur justement le grand départ pour la France, comment les photos, ici vous voyez devant un avion, comment les photos marquent cet instant du départ. J'espère vous avoir un peu intéressé et je vous remercie beaucoup pour votre attention. Merci beaucoup.
How do we build new narratives? Yeah, archive of photographs when words that connect stories and go back in. How does such operation simply echoes the process of growth and learning about oneself? And how do real foundations define beginnings and non-understandings? Amen. The work that I'm presenting today, a visual conversation, as an attempt to answer those questions. Throughout the years, I conveyed those elements into liminal space symmetry, the space of transition connecting the known and the unknown. Influenced by the French culture I grew up with, the fractured communication with my parents, caused by both a traditional mindset, the traumatic legacy of war, and the inability to find a common language in which we could fully understand one another, I created a word of my own. This word is also shaped by the surrealist influence of my deaf dad's paintings and his many stories told through the lens of an ever-imaginative reality. Rooted in a kind of speculative mythology, my work draws from pop culture, fictional narratives, science fiction, intimate stories, ancestral heritage, and shared conversation with people I encounter. I explore the concept of cosmos circulation, projecting a sentient life form into my photographs, objects, and installation. I infuse subjectivity into my reinterpretation of my family archives photographs, keeping in mind that the final result always has to be alluring, as an homage to the perfect compositions found in my family's photographs, and with the same dedication to beauty that has built my fashion imagery over the years. Beauty dictated by my mother's obsession for appearances, later understood as a desire to fit in, and her refusal to be seen as a war refugee in the eyes of others, but also dictated by the dream of a beautiful life in Europe after the departure from Vietnam in 1979. My own story serves as a receptacle of elements, historical informations, anecdotes, sensation that I extract and reshape into new forms. The essential ingredient of the narrative structure being the substance, that nutriment that feeds your soul, a scent that you have smelled once and that your senses will never forget. Using cognitive remembrance to rekindle lost items inhabited by stories, the colors, the broken ramification, the interplays of materials and shapes. An organized chaos that gives birth to multi-phase installations. For each of my exhibitions, I offered a new home for what has been displaced, for objects and memories lingering in an obsessive quest of belonging. The work that resulted from this search are like bones and legs to connect and ground the ever-floating mirage of a forgotten truth. The same bones and legs that keep me walking and ascending that big mountain made of lights and shadows. I believe these connections create a vessel for children of the diaspora, carrying visible meanings that can yet be understood and felt by those who share a common history, even across generations. I believe that relying on archive photography and historical cultural narratives helps us feel better new authentic stories. Between 2017 and 2021, I delved into the power of memories in a piece of work titled Tropism: Consequences of a Displaced Memory. The work gives a face to those tropisms that describes spontaneous and automatic reactions initiated by vivid emotions in response to primary needs of past events in life. Based on archival pictures from my family, the digital intervention interprets this memory through a new angle, exploring the effect of dissipation generated by time passing and driven by the forces of an inherited memory. This first study is an invitation for a treasure hunt on paper, where the image mark the roots, reconnecting past and present, leaving behind them the mere and haunting presence of nostalgia. In biological terms, the tropism is the innate ability of an organism to turn or move in response to an external stimulus. In a positive tropism, the subject will move toward the stimulus. On the contrary, a negative tropism expresses a rejection, with the subject moving away from the tropism. This phenomenon is observed in botanical and ethological studies. For example, plants, insects, or animals respond primarily with a positive tropism to sunlight. In 1939, French author Nathalie Sarraute published a book titled Tropism, exploring the inner movements defined by our consciousness. In her book, she delves into the behaviors, feelings, gestures, and dialogues originated by these emotional reservations through 24 scenarios set in very extraordinary context. Consequences of a displaced memory echoes this process by giving a new form to a series of events that occur, most of them prior to my birth. For each image, relatives and objects in the photograph seem to be diluted into abstract lines and colors, but without ever really disappearing. The execution results in an instinctive intervention and an attempt to translate a spontaneous and vivid impression of the photograph, rather than a long observation and analysis of a floating sensation. What seems to be an acted reality is in fact a conversation with the past, by reconnecting time and space in the same place where nothing is permanent or trapped, but on the contrary, continues to circulate. The project explores the voyage of the recollection and interpretation of situations in which I did not take part, but through which I still inherently feel connected to. It is about the power of this intangible kinship physically expressed through these digital manipulations. Places and people merge. He, she, they, here and there become one after having been set apart for so long. By dematerializing partially the memory of the image, I aim to ease the flow of speech patterns and allow new narratives where I can also invite myself in. Like water which always finds its way to flow, I wanted to liberate them and leave within their silhouettes the sensation of the tale more than their physicality. Family portrait pictures is a eternal ethnos, landscapes redrawn in the manner of a watercolor painting. subliminal images of a vanished childhood. Through a collection of evocatively titled photographs such as family portrait, home, the Christmas tree, the wedding, etc., an aesthetic of loss and restoration emerges. From weddings to birthday celebration resurfacing from the past, the pictorial strength of this work supplement intimate moments that can belong to both individual and collective experiences. The creative process of these projects was different from my previous works, where every story I told was meticulously prepared and researched, ensuring that every detail composing the frame was carefully considered. With the Tropism project, however, I chose to distort these memories in a highly instinctive manner. I spent time looking at hundreds of family photos. One would capture my intention, and I would work on it without questioning why. It's a constant fluctuation, where I challenge the subjects and investigate the past for more or less time. By photographing one's family, we cultivate the belief in union, connection, and the deep-rooted nature of stories and beings. As if these emotions were meant to transcend time, to be seen and felt, even without having experienced them directly. When some titles were more descriptive, some others came as the striking feeling that submerged me at the moment when I saw the photo. I Saw You in Penam, archives from year 17. Was a direct déjà vu with almost 50 years apart while I was on a trip in Malaysia for my cousin's wedding in 2019. A scene of my young aunt on a beach in Vietnam from 1970 traveled time and space to come and meet me on a more recent black and white scene taken on a beach in Penang. The Forgotten, archived from the year 70. The title of this picture came from a series of documentaries that I watched while doing research on the history of the first Indo-Chinese immigration camps in south of France. In a sequence, a young woman is being interviewed and shared the story of her youth at the camp. She says that during the summer, while her classmates were gone on holidays, her and her sister were working in fields, collecting beans every day. During their lunch break, they would lay under the sun in order to get tanned, so they could pretend they went on holidays when school started again in September. That anecdote stayed with me, and so the pictures of my aunt sunbathing on sunchairs while on holiday became a recollection of what I envisioned while watching the sequence from the documentary's title, The Forgotten from Indochina. The Dancers, archive from the year 85. In this picture, made from photographs from my parents' wedding, the couple's first dance, a symbol of union, becomes synchronized and loses its meaning. The scene reveals a solitary male figure dancing alone, a metaphor for a household dominance that gradually erases the other. I ended up erasing my mother, and I made my father dance with himself. The dialogue wasn't longer on this image, surely because observing my parents' relationship felt directly connected to my personal experience. In my most recent solo show in Paris this year, the white dress, the roses and the black window was facing the dancers. It depicts a young girl in a white dress, still and enigmatic, surrounded by vibrant flowers and a house in the background. Though her gaze is unseen, one can sense she is staring straight ahead. Behind her, a house and striking red flowers assert their presence, while a black square filled the window. An opening toward infinite possibilities. This central figure is my younger aunt. She embodies defiance. She rejected imposed norms and refused male dominance. Later on, she preferred tailored suits over traditional dresses. In Family Portrait at the Wedding, archived from the year 85, this photograph embodies abundance. The curtains are richly adorned with motifs representing elements of nature. the zebra pattern shimmering against a deep black background. These curtains are so red that they dominate much of the frame, enveloping the family as if offering protection. Behind them, a window, a door, an entry, an exit, suggesting either an opening or a closure. This piece is set on a hand-sculpted pedestal created with French-Vietnamese designer Quentin Von. It stands as a monumental work within this corpus. Like a self-supporting memory asserting its place in the world, this family wedding portrait of my parents symbolizes a connection between loved ones. Through this pedestal, both domestic and organic in appearances, I wanted to offer the possibility of anchoring a moment. In the spirit of the monument object, I wanted to inscribe my family's history within the collective narratives of the Vietnamese diaspora. This piece expresses a tangible yearning for a legitimate place, a safe harbor to preserve and transmit stories that must be remembered. The artwork carries an unsettling elegance with excrescences along the pedestal sidewalls referencing thorns from roses. The evocation of the rose is a metonymic representation of my mother, who tended magnificent rose bushes in our small suburban garden. Each exhibition featuring the Tropism project is conceived as an immersive installation in which I seek to recreate a sense of form. These installations oscillate between domestic spaces and sacred sanctuaries. In Vietnamese culture, sharing a meal is a profound expression of love. The wooden structure supporting the photograph is inspired by the dining table from my childhood house in the suburbs of Paris. In 2019, after visiting the France-Americanist fountain by Kara Walker at the Tate Modern in London, it became clear to me that we needed to celebrate louder the many stories of our families. Again, the desire to elevate the ordinary into something as big as memorable than a monument was for me a way to celebrate the love and our gratefulness. I wanted this to become my monument. This piece was recently acquired by the National Center of Applied Art in France, a milestone for me as my first piece entering a national collection, but most importantly, an unerasable piece of cultic history that will remain in time. Rituals participate to the power of transmission and to the fight against oblivion and forgetfulness. To revisit these archives is to summon memories in order to converse with them in the present time and reconnect them with new tools of storytelling. Repetition is an echo to remind us of something or someone's existence. It's giving importance to the very delicate, the temporary, but also the very ordinary that speaks with a universal resonance. A story is passed on by repeating it, whether verbally or visually. This picture is called Yadin, archived from the year 72. There was a great sense of excitement when I worked on this photograph. When I revived the colors that had faded with time, I remember feeling an intangible warmth, as if I could hear the cacophony within the image, the same cacophony I grew up with during Christmas evenings, gatherings in Belgium, surrounded by these very same family members, who 20 years later would place us, their nieces and nephews, on the bed for a group photo in the apartment when they had arrived in 1979. The colors and patterns in this image are also a reminiscence of Vietnam, which I rediscovered when I returned in 2016. I observed the explosion of color and motifs on the street, on house facades, pastel pinks, blues, and yellows, weathered by the sun and time. The large modern houses, with their plain white facades, seem to erase and all the warmth of an era that had passed, yet still refused to let its heart stop beating. The yellow walls of Saigon Central Post Office made my eye glow each time I passed by on a scooter. The patterns also reminded me the layered clothing worn by women on scooters in the city, shielding themselves from the sun. Long polka dot gloves, zip jackets pulled up to the neck, hoods, long pants, skirts. I was fascinated by them when I first returned to Vietnam in 2016, eagerly photographing them until eventually I stopped noticing them altogether after returning time after time. I never shared those photographs. I realized that my gaze was the one of an outsider, devouring and familiar with the fears of curiosity. But I didn't want to be an outsider. Deep down, I longed to become Vietnamese again. And to do so, I had to understand, to blend into the everyday reality that felt so distant from my Western experience. This picture is called The Odalisque, archived from the year 72. When I was a kid, I watched my father painting in our garage, surrounded by everything that he was passionate about. A lot of books about classical paintings. One day he sat me next to him and asked me to paint my own version of the great Odalisque from ink. And I remember putting even more vertebras than the original. I've been told that every little details count. The great Odalisque came back years later from my graduation project depicting different layers of femininity, 3 different types of women. Of course, none of them were Asian. She then appeared as an evidence when I saw this picture of my aunt laying on the bed of their home in Yadin back in 1972. She was my real version of the Odalisque. To conclude, I believe the dialogues that emerges are as much bridges being built as they are ones breaking apart, only to sometimes reconnect. Thanks to the persistent study of a figure one might call an architect or a builder, an observer, a contemplator of nature, an engineer, a bricklayer, a researcher driven by hope, seeking to mend a world shaken by catastrophes. From such perseverance, new bridges arise, like a task imposed upon oneself, a duty to fulfill against old odds. Through a reimagined family album, I embarked on a singular quest into the vast labyrinth of memory, questioning the fate of sensations. Looked for something grounding. We investigate little things, like biologists, geologists, referencing pieces of stone or moss. We look into the microbe and transform things into macro. Non-scientific people like me just see the importance of building an ecosystem in which we can survive, live, and find solace. I observe the fragility of things, the delicate layers that live on the image, are like a small membrane on the verge of breaking. But the work is intuitive, and I trust the word I created for myself, because in this word, weaknesses and strength are sat at the same table, beauty and sadness are eating the same food, joy and anger are dancing together. Everything is just an echo, which is beautiful to look at. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today, and a special thanks to the event organizers of Jacqueline and Tom for entering to such incredible and important events. I'm very grateful. So for this presentation, I would like to share some reflection on the idea of photography in contemporary arts created by the Vietnamese diaspora. The photographers and artists I will be discussing are the children or grandchildren of Vietnamese exiles who arrived in Europe or in North America between the 50s and the late 90s. So many of these artists at some point in their artistic journey questioned their connection to Vietnam. While it may not be a recurring theme throughout their careers, it is often a subject they explore through photography. Several factors drive these different contexts. First, the reluctance of the artist's parents to share their personal histories, and second, the prevailing narrative widely propagated by Western politics and media that oversee Vietnamese are a model minority. This stereotype suggests that their Vietnamese identity is either invisible or subdued, implying that they have seamlessly assimilated into French or American culture. Growing up in such silent environments, younger generation of Vietnamese, whom scholar Alexis Noops refers to as post-exile, experience a certain unease. What is their place in the family narrative, and to which country do they belong? In this quest for identity, family photographs hold a significant importance. These images serve as intangible evidence of their parents' life in Vietnam and the early years of their new lives in France or the United States. While these photos often raise questions, many of which remain unanswered, they also provide comfort. They are concrete, albeit fragmented, links that connect these artists to their family lineage and by extension to Vietnam. Even when taken outside of Vietnam, these photographs reveal a Vietnamese culture that persists in daily life for food, that celebrations, ancestral altars, and grandmothers posing ao dai alongside grandchildren dressed in jeans and t-shirts. For some artists of Vietnamese descent, these photographs become a starting point, an entry into an investigation that frequently leads to a journey back to Vietnam, the so-called homeland. For others, family photos are missing entirely. Some have lost them, while others never had any. In such cases, artists turn to photography themselves or repurpose existing images, such as those found in flea markets, to reconstruct a tangible link between Vietnam and their own identity. Whether found or taken, these photographs become tools for crafting new self-narratives, allowing artists to easily integrate themselves onto a family history and into a broader Vietnamese history. Sorry. Thank you. So the artist here is sorry for the pronunciation, Trong. He explores photography both as a medium for memory work and as a tool for questioning the spaces in which family memory unfolds between Vietnam and the United States. His series here, Delivers, divided in two parts, revolves around family memory and the places in which it manifests. The first part of the series consists of pastel reproduction of family photographs, his family photographs. These images capture a moment from life in Vietnam and the US, some featuring the artist himself, others predating his birth. Through his choice of vibrant color and the absence of defined outlines, Nguyen highlights the fluctuating nature of memory. As researcher Annette Cohn discusses the family secrets, acts of memory and imagination, memory is an active process. When we recall a past event, we never recount it in a neutral, exact, or exhaustive manner. Memory is composed of edits, reframings. It changes colors, expands, or diminishes over time and across generations. By drawing inspiration from children's coloring book, the artist translates how he perceives these family photos as visual fragments of ever-shifting stories that he has encountered since childhood. With time, these memories transform, sometimes to the point of being forgotten. Thus, the outlines of figures fade, leaving only blurred colored shapes that ooze the detail and spill beyond their contours. The choice of color pastel, a medium that never fully solidifies, perfectly conveys the instability of memory. The second part of the livers can be seen as Nguyen's attempts to solidify, so to use his own words, his family memories. Here he embeds pastel reproduction of his family photos into contemporary photographs of the place they once lived, in photos he took years later with Juan's right. In this process, the pastel images, once fluid and adaptable, are now confined within the digital collage, locked in a fixed moment. Their colors can no longer shift or dissolve. By layering two temporalities, that of memory and that of the present-day location, the artist seeks to preserve what he knows of his family memory in history. He attempts to resist the passage of time, which inevitably pushes this memory towards oblivion. It is noteworthy that the artist primarily seeks to solidify memories tied to places, particularly houses, by overlaying his pastel memories onto images of houses in both the United States and Vietnam. The artist reaffirms his sense of belonging to these locations, transforming the concept of a house into that of a home. In her photographic series De Retour, artist Nguyen seems to experience the opposite. The places she visits are imbued with a sense of strangeness and emptiness. The landscapes she captures appear blurred, and the houses and grounds she wanders seems empty, deserted. Her memory of Vietnam is instead transcribed in the background of a restaurant where her father is sitting. A picturesque landscape that I didn't put in the study. So it's a picture of a dad, her father, sitting in a restaurant, and behind her is a picturesque landscape, often found in postcards. A fantasized, dreamed image of a Vietnam she did not know. This first return to Vietnam was made with her father, who had just obtained his Swiss passport. This official identity document is the reason why the artist encourages her father to make this return trip with her, even though he hasn't been back for decades. As if this new document, attesting to her father's Swiss identity, would erase his Vietnamese memories. Much like Trong Nha Duong, Nguyen is driven by the fear of losing family memories and the desire to experience and capture them in Vietnam. Her work takes on a melancholic tone, where the estranged body attempts to insert itself into the landscape, seeking to take roots. We find this desire for rooting in a departed, fantasized territory in some works of the artist Bao Wong. The artist discovered during his adolescence that there were no photographs of him as a child. Due to the circumstances of exile and prolonged waiting, his parents were unable to document this period through photography. To Bao Wong, this lack of images creates a significant narrative gap. He believes that to understand himself and his story, photography is essential. This sentiment aligns with sociologist Irene Jonas' idea that self-knowledge is also shaped by the photographs we have of ourselves. His Torn series seeks to bridge this narrative gap by adopting anonymous images purchased from flea markets in Saigon. He aims to reconstruct his history through the process of projection. His collection process is meticulous, driven by the emotional connection he feels with the photo he finds. For him, vernacular photography can only become a medium for memory if it evokes feelings and emotion that resonate with his own history. Naturally, his focus is on images of children and altered images, some of which he modifies himself to reflect his sense of fragmented memory. The anonymity of these photos allow for open interpretation. The bodies of water in front of which the children stand and clap are immediately seen by Bao Wang as symbols of his own exile by the sea. On these faces, often darkened by backlighting, he can project his own identity and history. Thus, these photographs come to embody a memory they did not originally carry. He then extends these images by adding different materials: charcoal, ink, watercolor, or even dried insects. All these elements breathe new life into the anonymous photographs. This addition transforms the orphan photographs into part of the artist's personal narrative. This narrative leans towards fiction, as it doesn't necessarily depict how events unfolded for the artist, but rather how he feels about them. For instance, the little boy posing on the seashore has roots drawn under the lakes, symbolizing the artist's deep connection to a Vietnam he has barely known. This idea of a Vietnam that was left before he could even get to know it is echoed in Le Garçon et son Falais, where the artist imagines a childhood he could have had in a dream of Vietnam. In this sense, he nurtures an imaginary of post-exile, a term I borrow from recent share Alexinus. And I quote, "Exile feeds on the affectivity of a territory left behind, whether voluntarily or not, whereas post-exile adds the fantasy of lost territory. The former results itself or not in the work of mourning, while the latter settles into a melancholic posture." End of quote. To conclude this presentation, I think it's interesting to focus on photographic projects that explores how Vietnam, as a culture and identity, has been implanted outside its borders in a highly visible way. The Vietnam-Nebraska project takes shape from family photographs collected from the Vietnamese diaspora in the city of Lincoln, United States. These photos, similar in themes and poses, reveal the community's strong attachment to Vietnamese culture and its dynamism. These family photographs are then extended over time by Bien Den, who takes up his camera to capture the faces and present-day lives of this Vietnamese member of the Vietnamese diaspora. This series thus presents family portraits as well as images of places of worship or work, where the architecture and decor evoke Vietnam, creating a striking contrast with the rural North American environment in which they are situated. This series, structured like an extended family album, is particularly significant because it challenges the idea that the Vietnamese diaspora is an invisible community, fully assimilated into its host country. The income diaspora, as photographed by Bien Den, appears as a microcosm in the middle of the United States, where cultural life revolves almost entirely around its connection to Vietnam. The researcher Kataria introducing the concept of memoryscape to describe these spaces where the memory of a departed homeland seems to be reconstructed within the host country's territory. She states, quotes, "In the context of migration, the landscape of memory, which reflects the interaction between memory and spatiality, is necessarily transnational, bridging the here and the there, and is also transtemporal, spanning the past and the present." End of quote. This is indeed a different Vietnam, one beyond its geographical borders. We see it in the architectural structures, in the poses in front of large SUVs and upscale suburban houses. It is a Vietnamese culture that blends with the American culture in which it is embedded. This fusion intensifies with the second generation of the diaspora as their children learn the history and values of their host country. Yeah, that was the last sign for Bindas. To conclude, in their own way, the younger generation of Vietnamese overseas are negotiating with their Vietnamese heritage, following the culture of their parents while adapting it to their Western lifestyle application. As we can see from Binda's work, young Vietnamese in the US are asserting their Vietnamese heritage in universities. So that's the picture from before. Through association with other Asian communities, for example. In this presentation, I have just described a few artists who are seeking to understand their Vietnamese identity in order to reclaim it. But there are many others, as you can see here, a few examples. In Europe and in North America, for example, numerous currents of very young artists are using photography and other mediums to talk about their connection to Vietnam, whether through their family history or through the history of ancient and contemporary Vietnam. Thank you.